going to be from the time we were kids, because he is and singularly focused, which is a wonderful thing that God has given unto him, and it has blessed our community immensely by allowing him to achieve all of those things that he has, so that he can then help those of us grow behind him. We bless and thank the name of the living God for our teacher for the night, even Rabbi Sholomo, and Chief Rabbi Levi and Levy. We pray that the Most High God would even be with him. Rabbi Levy, it's all you, sir.
Amen. Total Rabbi Shalom L'chol. It is a blessing to be connected with all of you this evening. Of course, I'm coming to you from my home in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And I want to begin by reflecting on the things we should be thankful for, especially during this crisis of the COVID pandemic, what I call the plague, the nega. And although it's presented many challenges, it's prevented us from being in our places of worship. On the other hand, it has allowed us to connect in some new and different ways, and in some beautiful ways. To be together as we are tonight, as we have been on various Shabbats, even in my own family, to be able to have Erev Shabbat dinner together, something we've never been able to do. So out of challenges come new capabilities. And so this is something to be thankful for. If you consider in a normal year, we would all be counting the Omer, as we are now, but we would be doing it individually. And so this is one of the good things that we should be thankful for. What I hope to do tonight is to have more of a conversation rather than a lecture. One of the things about this technology is we could share ideas and views and different opinions. So it's different from a lecture or a sermon in that sense. So I'm really going to try to teach rather than preach. And to give some insight. Let me start the way we do in the rabbinic approach to studying Torah. And the reason our late great Chief Rabbi W. Matthews, in bringing our people back into the knowledge of who we are as Israelites, chose for us to be on a rabbinic path, is rabbinic teaching is a way of studying Torah and thinking about the Creator. It is not a set, although there are halakha and different things, but our view is the methodology of how you study Torah. And this is different, and I often compare it to people who know something about the law and who can read the law, and people who are lawyers. And a lawyer reads the law differently than a layperson might read the law, and you think you know what it means. You think you understand what that law says just reading the text of the law itself. But a lawyer would understand what that actually means in a court of law. Similarly, especially now with this coronavirus, there are a lot of people have a lot of health advice. A lot of it is good, but it is different from a medical approach. People who have studied medicine who look at things from a medical point of view. And so the same is true when it comes to Torah. Anyone can read it, and Hashem reveals himself to individuals by opening up their consciousness and their mind, so they're capable of having good insight, and we pray for this. But the rabbinic approach is a systematic way of looking at it. And the way we typically do this is first we look at the Peshat. What does the Torah actually say? That's the first place to start, with the actual text of what the Torah says. And that's always paramount in our minds. Then we have Darash, which is our commentary. So never put commentary before what the actual Torah says. Start there, and then everybody's entitled to their opinion, as we will do tonight. So we start there, and then we have Darash. And then we try to have the collective wisdom of the ages. So these conversations and discussions have been going on among learned, wise, and sincere people for hundreds, even thousands of years. And so we benefit by considering what other sincere, intelligent people have said and thought over the centuries, including our own traditions and our own rabbis in preserving their words, their positions, their traditions, and their minhagim. And so this brings me to my father, Chief Rabbi Levi ben Levy, who would often teach from the Torah and Deuteronomy, where it says, the secret things belong unto the Lord our God. But those things that he have revealed belong unto us and to our children forever. That's Peshat. That's what the Torah says, that there are secret things. And that the Creator reveals those things to us, to his chosen people, on his appointed time, and shares them with them. So, therefore, when we look at this, what the Torah says is, you shall count. And the counting, this is Sefer, we say, counting the Omer. That's not actually what we're doing. Omer refers to a measurement of grain. So we're not actually doing that tonight. We are counting the days until we wave the Omer, right? So it is the counting. And the way it asks the Sefer, the way it asks us to count is interesting in that it doesn't say just count numerically. It says, Sheva Shavuot, you should count 7 weeks, counting in cycles of 7, which is different from just counting 1, 2, 3. Furthermore, and here we have, Exodus and Leviticus says, and you shall count from the morrow after the Shabbat. And the rabbinic tradition, of course, is to say the Shabbat refers to the first day of Hagah Passover, the Passover, the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And from the morrow after that, you start counting. Now, among our Karaite brothers, they interpret Shabbat to mean the 7th day Shabbat. And so they don't begin counting until the Shabbat after the Passover. And so that would put them on a different schedule. But in either case, if you count from the morrow after the Shabbat, and again, the reason the rabbis say Pesach is Shabbat, because the Torah refers to it as Shabbat Shabbaton. It is a day of rest. All the laws of Shabbat apply to the Pesach in terms of work and rest. So and all the high holy days are Shabbaton. So therefore, when it refers to Shabbat, we argue that it could be referring to the Passover. Now, of course, in Deuteronomy, it says that you shall start counting the Shavuot from the time you put the sickle to the corn. And that raises other kind of questions. And maybe I'll talk about some of this on Shavuot itself. I'm mostly going to talk about Ruth. But if you stick to particularly Exodus and Leviticus, but even with Deuteronomy, this counting, there is a method, a purpose for why the Creator wants us to count. And when you think about it, and this is what we wanted to reflect on, since we can calculate, if you start either on Hagah Pesach or the Shabbat after that, you will know what date the Shavuot is going to fall on, right? You could anticipate. You could have that date fixed, and it is a fixed date, falls on the same day every year in the Hebrew calendar, because it's 50 days from Passover. And this is the first month. On the 50th day of the month shall be the Passover. And so if you know that, and that's a fixed date, then Shavuot is also going to be a fixed date. So why not give the date and say on this day? Think about it. In Leviticus 23, it says, in the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, shall be Yom Teruah, right? A day of blowing the horns. So there we don't count how many days from Shavuot to Yom Teruah. We could, right? But it doesn't say we'll count from one festival, how many days from that festival to the next festival, as it does with Passover and linking these. And since in both cases, in all cases, we can have an exact date, why not, just as with Sukkot, with Hag HaMatzot, with Yom Teruah, to give the day specified by the month and the day that it falls on. So, this is what I want to impart with you. That in this case, the date itself, although important, is not the only point, right? The journey of getting there is also important. And that's why it's not sufficient simply to select the date. Similarly, those who haven't been doing the counting, and there might be a few out there, few Israelites, who don't actually count every day as we're supposed to, and they haven't actually counted the weeks. I call them my high holy day Israelites. We see them on Passover, and this is when there isn't a COVID. And then we might see them again on Shavuot, and then we may see them once or twice over the summer, and then they'll be back for at the river for Yom Teruah. So they may look at the dates and show up on the festival on the date, but it is not just the destination, it is the journey. And we have been on a journey, and every day of this journey is important, not just reaching the day. So everybody might get to the day, but even though on that day we may be on the same day, we may be even in the same physical space, but we won't necessarily be in the same spiritual place. Because if you haven't counted, right, and you just show up, you are not spiritually prepared. The counting itself is part of the process. And this is a lesson of life, that life is the journey, is it not? Not the destination, because the destination is the end of life as we know it. So we're not anxious to get to the end, right? But we enjoy the journey every day, what it takes us, what we do, what we learn, how we grow. It is the journey, not just reaching the destination. Some may not actually make the destination. The Torah tells us that of those who left the land of Egypt, only Joshua and Caleb actually made it into the land. So again, not just measuring things in terms of the journey. And it reminds us to live our lives with a sense of purpose. That every day you have a goal, you have a destination, you have something in mind that you're moving towards, right? And this is why we count. How many days until this? When it's something you are looking forward to, often something you're anxious, then you're very much aware. How many more days before my birthday? How many days before a holiday? How many days before you get paid? How many days before you see someone you miss who you have been looking forward to seeing? Then you are likely to count, right? That means you have something in mind and it is important and you're counting it. It also teaches us to be aware, consciousness, aware of the passage of time and events. I've referenced several times this evening how COVID-19 has affected our lives. But if I ask people, how long has this COVID crisis been going on? Not many people could tell us how many days it's been going on. How many days have you been sequestered in your home? How many weeks? How many months? So have we been counting it, or have we just been living it day by day, going past us? Maybe at some point when it's over, we could look back at it. Maybe we won't, or we'll forget it. Another example from Torah, it says that when our father Jacob arrived in Egypt after his son Joseph had been there, that Pharaoh was anxious to meet the father of Joseph. He says there's no man with Ruach Bo, with the spirit in him like Joseph. And this man, Jacob, is his father. So when he met Jacob for the first time, he asked him, how many are the days of your life? And this phraseology in Torah is significant because he could have just said, how old are you? But he didn't say, how old are you? And it maybe means the same thing. But the rabbis teach that a wise man doesn't just count his years. How many years old are you? But a wise man counts every day. Right? Not letting days, weeks, months of your life slip by and you just count the years. Right? But we should count every day. And so this for us also is counting the passage of these days, and to make us aware that we have a purpose, and that purpose is a meeting. We have an important meeting. Many people from reading the newspaper have lost their jobs during this corona crisis. Millions of people out of work. And as those people try to go back to work and find jobs, if you have an interview for a job, you're out there looking, you lost your job, and now you're trying to find a job, they'll set an appointment with you with that company. You will remember that day because you wouldn't miss your interview, your job interview. You need this job. Hopefully you will prepare for that interview. Have your resume, have your credentials, be ready to answer the questions, know something about the company so that you can do well in that interview. Well, here, if you have a meeting with the Most High God, how should you prepare? Should you just come in casually, without combing your hair, without washing up? Would you walk in unprepared? Would you arrive late? So this tells us, if we think about it, if we are aware of who we are and what it is we are about to do and who it is we are about to meet, then we would spend every moment between now and then preparing and getting ready. And so, in essence, that's what this counting is. The 7, of course, is Kabbalistic, that is, it is mystical, because he could have said count 50 days, but he said count 7 weeks, which there's 7 days in a week. 7 times 7 is 49, and then on the 50th day is Shavuot. So you could have just said the 50th, but in expressing it that way, there is a reason why it says count 7 weeks rather than just 49 days, although mathematically it's the same thing. This is mysticism, right? That in addition to the actual meaning, there are layers of meaning, layers of understanding. There are secret things that are revealed to us. And even though anybody could read it in any language, without an understanding and appreciation of these mystical things. So 7 is a mystical number. The Torah tells us that the Creator created the world in 7 days. Created 6 days, rested on the 7th day. 7 represents the completion of a process. So although you could have done other mathematical calculations to get to a particular number, 5 times 10, we'll get to 50. But this way is to count in cycles of 7. This is to teach us that things occur in cycles. They occur in a sequence starting from creation itself, and that you go through several cycles of preparation. So 7 weeks, that completes one cycle. Then another 7 weeks, that completes yet another cycle. And then 7 cycles of 7, right, represents the maximum level of purification and preparation that we could achieve to be able to come into the presence of the Most High God. So again, those who are not familiar or appreciate or understand our way of life, which is around 7, the Shabbat, right? Yom Teruah in the 7th month, Sukkot, to dwell in booth for 7 days, right? This 7 is mystical, and it is significant that we count in that way. And that's why in a few moments when we count the blessing, we won't just say what night of the Omer it is. We then have to calculate and say, how many weeks is that? Because the Torah says, don't count days, count weeks. So even though we count every day, and every day is not a week, we say how many weeks and how many more days to complete the next week in that cycle. And that's something that I hope you've been appreciating as we go. Let me show you, because I think we have the technology for those of you who've been using okay, can you see what I have on the screen there? I'm not sure. Can okay, all right. So for those of you who have been doing the Kabbalistic counting, and again, you don't have to, you can count any way that you want. But for those of you who've been using this Kabbalistic counting, this refers to a concept of Sephirot. Sephirot means these spheres, these worlds. And the chart that you can see there shows that there are 10 Sephirot. The first 3 represents Keter. Keter means crown. And when you go into a synagogue in the Paroket, it says Keter, right? The crown. The presence of the Most High God, the crown there at the top. And that each of these worlds, and that's what we call them, if you can see this, Keta, Chakma, Bina, each of these worlds are connected through these paths. And each one is a world in itself. And there are themes, you can tell almost from the names, that flow through. And so for the last few weeks, and now in the counting, now there are 10 Sephirot. These 3, the top 3 here, representing the Keter. What we do in the counting of the Omer is the lower 7. 7 Sephirot corresponding to the 7 weeks in the counting of the Omer. This week we are in what? Malkut. Right? Malkut meaning kingdom. And as you can see here, the Malkut world is the lowest to the physical world of the earth that we live in. And so we have been going down in this sense, but it's also the way we elevate up from our physical existence into a higher spiritual plane, we enter in Malkut and travel through the Sephirot up to Keter. And so this is why when we're here, right, this is the point of entrance into the spiritual worlds, the Olam Haba, Olamim, the master of all worlds, we say in our prayers, right? And so this is the Malkut where we will be entering. Now, for those of you who have been following along, the rabbis connect these 7 worlds with 7 attributes. Chesed, which is loving kindness. Gevura, which is justice. It's also discipline. You can't have justice without discipline. Tiferet, which is beauty. Netzach, you see here, is endurance, fortitude. Hud is humility and splendor. Yesud means foundation, but also bonding. And Malkut, which we're in now, is nobility. Right? And nobility goes with sovereignty and leadership. At least it should go with those attributes. And so I like, how do we apply the concept of we're preparing for something, we are going someplace. How do you prepare? How do you get ready? Well, of course, on Shavuot we'll have our white, and but how do we prepare spiritually? We prepare each day reflecting on one or more of these attributes, and then combining these attributes. So for a whole week, we think about nobility, but we think also about nobility and its connection to loving kindness, its connection to justice and beauty. And each night we've had a theme, that's what we're going to do tonight, and connecting that. And if you've done this sincerely, you have evolved, you have grown, you have developed over the last 6.5 weeks. And so now you are prepared to come in to Shavuot and bringing your offering, the karban, which is the Omer. There, when it says, and you shall bake it, it says it shall be of ephah, right, which is a measurement. And so Omer of wheat or barley refers to that amount, right? You bringing your Omer, the barley or the wheat offering that you're going to bring. That is the Omer. So we're counting how many days can we bring our Omer. We're not counting the Omer. We're counting how many days till we can bring our Omer. And then we will show up on Shavuot. And this again is where, our rabbis have had revealed wisdom, because although we've been counting, for most of our Jewish brethren around the world, they won't have any offering, right? But Chief Rabbi W. Matthews, Chief Rabbi Levy, Rabbi Yisrael, all of the students of Rabbi Matthew said there's certain things we don't have. We don't have a temple. We don't have sheep and goats. We don't have different things. But we do have the Omer. We do have the required measurement of flour or wheat to make our offerings. And so therefore we should do what we can do. And so we will be bringing. And this again is where, the rabbinic insight comes in, that when you show up on Shavuot, as we're going to do even this year, even in this Corona world, Rabbi Baruch and Rabbi Yehudah and I have been working out a way so that people can still bake their cakes and their bread and bring their offerings and wave them in order to be able to come into the presence of the Most High and present your offering. But you can't just come. If I can come back here, I guess. As I prepare to conclude, you can't just come before the Most High any way. Torah teaches us about Aaron's two sons, Nadab and Avihu, who just come before the Most High. We've been reading in the Torah, Hashem says, do not come before me at all times in any way. So you have to, prepare so that when you come, your offering will be accepted. So let me conclude, and I'm going to take some questions, but let me conclude with a story. And for those of you who know me well and have been hearing me teach and preach for a long time, I like to tell stories. And so this is a story, not a joke, but a story about two rabbis. And these rabbis were on a journey together. And they came to an inn, like a hotel, to stay the night, and they each checked into their room. And so early the next morning, both rabbis woke up and began saying their prayers. And one rabbi in one room, he began, making his prayers, and he was davening. And then he listened to the other rabbi who heard him saying his prayer. But then later, it sounded like he was talking to somebody over in his room. And then he sounded like he was arguing with somebody over there. So the rabbi, he looked through the peephole to see what was going on in the other rabbi's room. And he saw the rabbi pacing back and forth and talking and shouting and thinking and scratching his head. And so he asked him, he said, Rabbi, what's going on? He says, well, this morning I got up and I started to say my prayers and I couldn't get past the first two words. And what he's referring to every morning, the morning prayer that we say, many of you know this prayer when you get up in the morning, is Mode ani lefaneka melakai vekayom sheke zarita benishpati bekemla raba emunateka. Right? And what that means is Mode ani, thankful am I, lefaneka, to be before you, and grateful for that you have returned my soul unto me. My faithfulness is great. But he said this particular morning, the rabbi couldn't get past the first two words of his prayer. He said, Mode ani lefanecha. And right there, when he got to lefanecha, he was just, I can't believe it. I'm just in awe. How am I, Mode ani lefanecha, standing before the King of the universe? How am I standing before the King of the universe? How can little old me be standing before the Adon Olam? With all of my problems, with all of my contradictions, with all of my weaknesses, with all of my sins and frailties and limitations, how is it possible that I could ever be standing before the Master of the universe? And this is what just really occupied his mind that morning, that he was just pacing and thinking, how is it possible that I can be standing in the presence of the Almighty? And that boggled his mind, and it was just autumn, and he couldn't get past those first two words of the prayer that particular morning. And so the point of the story is that we should be like that rabbi, that we shouldn't just say our prayers so quickly without reflecting on how amazing and awesome it is that we are standing in the presence of the Most High God. If you were to have an audience with the Queen of England, you would certainly take note as you stepped into Buckingham Palace. Here I am from America, here in Buckingham Palace, about to meet the king, about to meet the queen. If you were to be stepping into the Oval Office at the White House, Rabbi Baruch knows a little bit about that, certainly you would have a moment as you walk through those gates into the White House to reflect, little old me from New York, here I am, right? Descendant of slaves, standing in the presence of the President of the United States. Last year, Rabbi Yeshurun and I and a few other rabbis, we were at Gracie Mansion, the home of the mayor of New York City. We were there for an event, and I recall stepping out on the grounds, on the grass behind the mansion, and going over to the railing. Again, those of you in New York, you know, Manhattan is an island. One side of the island is the Hudson River. The other side is the East River. And the gate, the railing of the mayor's mansion borders the East River. And as I stood there at the railing, I could see the other side of the river. And from that point, the other side of the river was Astoria Projects, which is where I was born, grew up as a little boy. I could literally see the projects from the mayor's residence. It's just a small river. The East River, that's where we go on Yom Teruah to throw out apples and blow the shofar. And you can see Manhattan over there. And to think in terms of distance, it was a very short distance across the river. But I reflected how far it was socially, politically, and economically to go from the projects to the mayor's house. These examples should cause us to reflect every day that we say our prayers. Even this evening, when we get up in the morning, we say our prayers. On Shabbat, when we say our prayers, you should pause before you enter the synagogue as you touch the mezuzah, that I'm about to step into holy ground. To be just conscious, aware of that. I'm about to enter. This is why when we say our prayers, we take out 3 steps forward, 3 steps back to say, I am spiritually now moving into a higher realm. I am moving into the Holy of Holies. As I come into this prayer, I'm stepping, literally stepping. And then at the end, we step back and bow as you leave the presence, because we've been in the presence. And so this is what we are doing. And if you would be in awe about meeting any princely, king, president, mayor, senator, billionaire, then you should be in awe every time you say, here I am in the presence of the Most High God, thanking him for restoring my life to me every day. And with that, I want to open up the discussion to any questions or comments. Rabbi Baruch, I turn it back over to you.